So let's talk about To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a book a lot of us probably read back in school, right? It feels like it's just part of the American fabric. But here's the thing. More than 60 years after it was published, its legacy is, well, it's more complicated than ever. And we're going to explore exactly why.
And this is really the heart of the puzzle with this book. On one side, you have this huge Pulitzer Prize-winning classic. It's celebrated for teaching us about courage and justice. But on the other side, it is one of the most frequently challenged books out there. I mean, it's constantly being debated and even banned from school libraries. So it's both beloved and, constantly being fought over.
Which brings us to the big question we're tackling in this explainer. Why? Seriously, what is it about this story of a small southern town in the 1930s that keeps provoking such powerful, conflicting reactions? Well, the answer isn't as simple as it looks.
To really get a grip on why this novel has such staying power, we have to stop thinking of it as just one story. It's actually more like a conversation happening across 3 of America's most pivotal decades.
And this is where things get really interesting. You see, the story itself is set in the 1930s, right in the thick of the Great Depression. But, and this is key, Harper Lee was writing it in the 1950s, just as the civil rights movement was starting to catch fire. Then, it gets published in 1960, dropping right into a decade of massive social change. She was basically using the past to write a parable for her present.
So, to really understand what the characters are up against, we need to do a little time travel. Let's step right into their world. Jim Crow, Alabama in the 1930s.
You have to imagine this town, Macomb. It's being squeezed by 2 massive forces at the same time. One is the absolute economic ruin of the Great Depression, and the other is the super rigid, violent social system of Jim Crow. And these weren't 2 separate problems, no way. They were tangled up, feeding off each other. And just to give you an idea of how desperate things were, look at cotton. It was the lifeblood of the Southern economy, and its price just completely collapsed. When people are that poor and that scared, it just pours gasoline on racial tensions. For some of the poorest white families, the color of their skin was the only thing they felt they had left.
And then, on top of all that poverty, you had the official system of Jim Crow. These were the rules written down in law books, mandating segregation in literally every part of life. We're talking separate schools, hospitals, even separate Bibles to swear on in court. And get this, in nearby Birmingham, it was actually illegal for a black person and a white person to sit down and play a game of checkers together. I mean, just think about that.
But you know what was even more powerful than the written laws? The unwritten rules, the so-called social etiquette. This was the day-in, day-out performance of white supremacy, and it was all backed up by the constant threat of violence. Every single interaction was designed to hammer home this idea of black inferiority. It was a total system of control.
So you take that volatile mix, the economic fear, the racial hierarchy, and it's a powder keg waiting to explode. And that explosion is the trial of Tom Robinson, the heart of the novel. But here's the thing. This trial wasn't just something Harper Lee dreamed up. It was pulled straight from the headlines of a real and infamous court case.
Let me introduce you to the Scottsboro Boys. Back in 1931, when Harper Lee was just a little girl, 9 black teenagers were falsely accused of raping 2 white women on a train, right there in Alabama. The case blew up. It became this national scandal, a perfect, tragic example of racial injustice.
Okay, so look at the parallels here. They're just uncanny, right? The false accusation, the lynch mob breathing down everyone's necks, the foregone conclusion of a guilty verdict. But you gotta notice the changes Harper Lee made. She simplifies it. 1 accused man instead of 9, 1 accuser. And she makes the lawyer, Atticus, this respected pillar of the community, a far cry from the inadequate lawyers the real boys had at first.
And that brings us to the really crucial question, why did she make those changes? Well, by taking this long, messy, years-long legal battle and boiling it down to a single, focused drama, Lee basically sharpened the moral lens for us. She stripped away all the gray areas to make the raw injustice of the situation absolutely, undeniably clear.
And that focus on clear moral questions, well, that takes us right into the literary heart of the novel. Let's talk about the big ideas and symbols that make this book tick.
First off, this book is what literary folks call a Bildungsroman. It's a fancy German word, but it just means a coming-of-age story. The entire plot is really about Scout and her brother Jem losing their childhood innocence as they come face to face with the moral hypocrisy of the adult world around them.
But it's not just a coming-of-age story. It's also pure Southern Gothic. I mean, think about the mysterious, almost ghostly figure of Boo Radley. Lee uses these spooky Gothic elements to suggest that racism isn't just a political issue, it's like a psychological disease, a dark secret that's haunting the whole town just beneath the surface.
Which, of course, brings us to the title, to the central symbol of the whole book. As Miss Maudie explains it so perfectly, mockingbirds are pure innocence. They don't do any harm, they just make beautiful music. And that's why, she says, it's a sin to kill one.
So, who are the mockingbirds in the story? The novel points us to two main ones. There's Tom Robinson, a good, innocent man who is utterly destroyed by the evil of racial injustice. And then there's Boo Radley, another kind, harmless soul who's been destroyed by the cruelty of his own family and the town's gossip. They are both victims of a world that senselessly attacks the innocent. Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. The history, the literary genius. We can finally circle back to our original question. Why is this book still so loved, and yet so controversial?
A huge part of the modern debate really revolves around one character, Atticus Finch. For decades, he was held up as this perfect moral hero. But more recently, people have started looking at him through the lens of the white savior trope. Now, this critique isn't saying Atticus is a bad guy. It's about the way the story is structured, where the narrative of black suffering is told through the journey of a white hero, which can leave the black characters themselves without much of a voice or agency.
But despite all that, the novel's incredible, enduring power really comes from its most brilliant move, telling the whole story through the eyes of a child. Scout's innocent point of view just demolishes all the complicated excuses that adults build up to justify their prejudices. Through her eyes, we see injustice for what it is, simple, profound, and just plain unfair. And in the end, this is the big lesson Atticus tries to leave Scout with. It's this fundamentally optimistic idea that most people are good, deep down, if we can just find the empathy to really see them. It's pretty much the novel's closing statement on humanity.
But that leaves us with one last, lingering question, doesn't it? When you look at all the brutal stuff that happens in the book itself, is that final message a piece of timeless wisdom we should all aspire to? Or is it a comforting idea that maybe oversimplifies a world that is much, much more complicated and difficult? That's a debate that's still very much alive today.